We are so glad that you're here. If we haven't met, my name is Carolyn Arends. I'm Renovaré's Director of Education. We have so been looking forward to this webinar, and we have to admit we've had a lot of technical glitches setting up this webinar, right up to my camera being blurry when we started. We had a glitch with the registration that may have affected you earlier on. And so, sometimes when you get a lot of pushback on something, it means that what you're going to do is really important. So we've been covering this with prayer, and we're really just so glad that you're here and really have a sense that this is a conversation that we need to have together. So it's fabulous that you're with us. We are calling this webinar, Weary Leaders: Why is Ministry Burnout so prevalent, and what can we do to help? We have three very helpful panelists with us that I'm going to introduce to you in just a moment. First of all, I'll introduce Sean Nemecek. I hope I'm saying his last name right. I meant to double check. Is that how you say it?
Nemecek.
Nemecek, like with a CH, Nemecek. Yeah. Sean Nemecek, there he is. Sean brings 18 years of pastoral experience to his work in caring for pastors. He is a third-generation pastor, so he grew up listening to pastors talk about their joys and struggles in ministry. It's something he knows really well, and he loves ministry families. Sean has written over 100 articles for his blog, which is called The Pastor's Soul, where he's working to combat pastoral burnout by training churches to care for their pastors and training pastors to care for their own souls. His book, which gave us the inspiration for our webinar title today, is called The Weary Leader's Guide to Burnout. And it comes out of his own experience as well as coaching other pastors through burnout. He is married to Amy, and she's a book editor for Baker Publishing Group, and they have one son. What's your son's name, Sean?
My son's name is Ben.
Oh, mine too. I have a Ben. That's great. And Sean is coming to us from his home office in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So thanks for being here, Sean.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is just a delight to be here.
Oh, we're so glad. Also with us is Bill and Kristi Gaultiere. Bill and Kristi are the founders. Hi, guys. They're the founders of a ministry called Soul Shepherding that I know a lot of you on this call will be familiar with and beneficiaries of. They are the authors of Journey of the Soul, a practical guide to emotional and spiritual health. And they minister to and train leaders, pastors, spiritual directors, and others through the Soul Shepherding Institute. And they lead a network of spiritual directors and sabbatical coaches. Bill is a psychologist and ordained pastor specializing in ministry to pastors, and Kristi has her doctorate in psychology and is a therapist and spiritual director. You can learn more about Bill and Kristi's work at soulshepherding.org and journeyofthesoul.org, and they're coming to us from their prayer room, which is quite lovely in Irvine, California. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you, Carolyn. So good to be with you and Sean and the Renovaré family.
Wonderful.
Very happy to join you today.
It's good. It's good. And right that we are together. So I'm going to just start putting questions to you. Before I do that, let's just offer up a prayer. Take a moment. Father, Son, and Spirit, we need you. We need you to speak through these friends here. We need your life, your love, your energy flowing into our lives. I'm thinking about Matthew 28-30, Jesus, when you said, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." Jesus, that's such a good invitation. We do want to learn how to live more freely and more lightly. Thanks for these friends, Bill and Kristi and Sean, and the work you've called them to, helping people learn that your yoke is easy and your burden is light. We want to learn from you through them today. So we give you this time. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right. Well, let's start with definitions. I'm wondering if each of you has a working definition of what we even mean when we talk about burnout. And the background to this is that many people who submitted questions, I'm thinking of questions from Joanne and Theo and Jen, they were asking, how do I discern the difference between overwork and, trying to carry my cross on Jesus' behalf, versus just sacrificial giving and working hard and doing the work I'm called to do. So maybe I'll throw to Sean first. Sean, do you have a working definition for how do we know when it's crossed over to burnout, or what is your definition of burnout?
Yeah, I have a series of questions I ask my coaching clients to see if they're in burnout. But really, when it comes down to a definition, I like to say that burnout is what happens when our inner life with God isn't sufficient to sustain our outer work for God. We just become depleted, and it's a total depletion of self, just exhaustion on every level.
Wow. That seems to make sense. How about you guys, Kristi and Bill? How do you think about it?
I think it's helpful to differentiate burnout and stress overload. Stress overload is, they're often mixed up. Stress overload is maybe working too much and being overstressed, anxious, internalizing a lot of stress, which can lead into burnout. But burnout has with it discouragement, really depression, probably shame. And so there is we lose our passion, we lose our energy. Like you were saying, Sean, that inner life is not rich and alive with abiding in Christ and God's word, and in our relational context is not replenishing us and strengthening us. So burnout usually goes with some degree of depression.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I will maybe, there were a lot of questions about what are some signs that burning out is imminent or you're there. And I'll ask you those in a minute. But first, maybe I'll ask you about one of the premises even of the webinar, and you might have to correct it for us. The webinar says, why is it so prevalent? In your experience, is burnout prevalent, and is it on the rise? Is that your sense in the work that you're doing? Bill, is that something you're seeing?
Well, I think burnout is as old as the hills. I mean, we've got stories in the Bible like Elijah after Mount Carmel burning out. So it certainly seems from our experience in soul shepherding and the pastors, missionaries, leaders, church leaders that we work with, spiritual directors, coaches, I think the pandemic unearthed a lot of stuff that was not resolved in us, and certainly brought a lot of stress, a lot of conflict. And so many of the people we help in soul shepherding are in the crosshairs of that kind of conflict, because most people in ministry are shepherds, and they're caring people, they're peacemakers. And so when they've got people on opposite sides of political issues and masks and health issues and vaccines and all these things, and they're in the middle of that, and they just want it to be about Jesus. They just want to love people. And most of the people that we work with are good at loving people on both sides. But then when you've got people that you're serving that are not of that mindset, and they're fighting with each other, and they have opposite expectations for you. So pastors and leaders getting caught in that crossfire. So I do think that burnout is really up, and the Barna statistics are showing that.
Yeah, I think that's so true. The pandemic, during that time, so many pastors sacrificed their self-care so that they could care for others, which is a huge mistake that we make in ministry. But as the pandemic ended, I started to see pastors experiencing more and more burnout. They were just beginning to recognize the problem. And it's ever since then, it's really been on the rise. I think also our political climate and just the anger that's generated by social media has really contributed to the problem too. We're just living in a society that's so conflicted right now that pastors are getting hit from all sides. I've talked with pastors who said, doesn't matter which decision I make, half the church is going to be angry with me. And that's a hard space to live in.
Yeah. Anything you'd add to that, Kristi, about kind of what you're seeing in terms of levels of burnout?
Yeah, I definitely think it's on the rise. I think the pace at which we move in today's culture is a part of this as well. The expectations we have for ourselves and that are on us, I think, are being constantly tuned into screens, having a working computer in our hands, on our bodies at all time. I think the incredible temptation to neglect our own soul and the compelling needs in ministry even the work that we're called to, it's such a high calling. It's so compelling, but often we lack boundaries and don't know how to care for our soul and don't have people that are there to aid us in that or to teach us that. I think loneliness is another big part of this burnout. Too often we are feeling isolated as leaders. We don't have support. We don't have safe places. One of the things I so appreciate about the ministry of Renovaré is you are creating those safe spaces for leaders. And that's so important. One of the things that we, in talking with a leader this year, really appreciated was she said, my experience of leadership is that leadership is suffering. And Bill and I were just like, yes, thank you for acknowledging that. I mean, that's certainly our experience as well. And I think that isn't often acknowledged, the high cost that comes with leadership.
Mm-hmm. So anything else you would say just before we leave sort of definitions and is this on the rise? I think what I sensed in some of the questions people asked is like, we are supposed to work hard though, right? And is there anything inherently wrong with working hard? Is it load, or is it how we're approaching the load, or is it some combination thereof? When do you want to dive in on that?
Yeah, I think it's a lot how we approach the load. You know, I love that you quoted Matthew 11:25-30. That's the theme passage for my life and in many ways for soul shepherding. But we forget that when Jesus is teaching on his easy yoke and his rhythms of grace, that he's talking about getting work done. He's talking about pulling a plow across a field because people are hungry. And most of us spend most of our waking hours working, particularly if you understand work it transcends a job. It's works of love, it's service, it's helping people, it's creating value for society. And so the context of work is so important for our discipleship to Jesus. So the problem is really not our work. Now, some of us are doing too much work, and that is a problem, but I find the problem is a lot more in the attitude, the demeanor that we bring into our work. And I mean, it's obvious that the work-life balance, that we need to be in balance. We need rest, we need recreation, we need fun, we need relationships. That's certainly part of the conversation. But so much of it is the demeanor that we bring into the work that we do. And we tend to rely on ourselves and our own giftings, our own intelligence, and start trying to make things happen for God. And we'll do that in ministry. And that's a path to burnout. Instead of being in that easy yoke, which in soul shepherding we call a secure attachment relationship, borrowing this psychology term for how we bond and how we relate. That's really what it is. Me and Jesus, us and Jesus, walking and working together. It's about relationship and a relationship of intimacy with God. And so that's meant to sustain us for all of life, so that we're bringing that nourishment from God and from all the ways that God provides us in the scriptures, of course, but in nature, in our relationships. And so that is brought into our work so that we're doing our work not only for God, but with God.
So good. So many people asked about, let's go with the questions around, how do I know if I might be in danger of burning out, or maybe I am burnt out, or maybe somebody that I care for, a leader in my community, or somebody I'm married to, or a parent of, or a child of. So what are some of the questions that each of you ask if you're trying to help somebody assess exactly where they are in this continuum? Sean, where would you begin with someone?
Yeah, so I have 4 questions that I go to just kind of diagnose whether or not someone might be in burnout. They're just yes or no questions. The first question is just, are you tired? Are you exhausted? And we're talking about not just a little tired and, not just needing a nap, but this is the type of tired that goes all the way down to your bones. It just touches every part of you. The second question is, are you feeling less effective in your work? You may be working harder than ever, but producing less. And you're finding things that used to be easy now are difficult. Things that used to bring you joy no longer do anymore. And so you just lost this sense of effectiveness at work. The third question I ask is, have you lost your sense of self or your sense of call? As you think about your call, are you wondering why do you do this anymore? Or maybe when you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror, the person looking back seems like a stranger to you. You may have lost your sense of joy. So really, have you lost your sense of self? And then the last question is, are you feeling hopeless, or have you lost optimism? Are you feeling stuck? And if the answer to all four of those questions is yes, there's a really good chance you're in burnout.
Helpful. Is that similar as soul shepherding to how you would approach the conversation? Are there other questions you ask?
That is similar. I think we also will ask if they're preoccupied with their work. Are they having intrusive thoughts regarding work? Are they waking up in the night thinking about it, having trouble putting it to rest? Are they feeling restless or guilty if they're not working? Sometimes that can be something that's a sign even that they're in pre-burnout or they're headed to burnout. Symptoms such as that is feeling as if they're not accomplishing something productive, they feel inadequate. If they're feeling ashamed, a lot of plagued by shame, not meeting other people's expectations or their own expectations can be a real setup. If they're overworking to please somebody else and they're over-attached to what people are thinking of them, or if they're over-attaching to what they do and their identity, these are some other things that can really set us up for burnout. I think in my own experience, personally, the burnout that I hit was one of compassion fatigue. And so I found myself not even able to pray for people, getting emails and requests for prayer and finding I didn't even have words left anymore. I was too fatigued, too tired, that I was experiencing so much vicarious trauma, which we do in ministry, that my soul was hurting too much from that trauma. And I was overcome with my own emotions and wasn't able then to be present, to give, to care, to contain anybody else's emotions. So sometimes burnout can come from our own experience of ministry, not necessarily from overworking, but just our soul can't contain any more of the responsibility or the pain.
So helpful. One of our participants, and I apologize, Tim, I can't find you on my sheet right now. I can't remember your name, but I know you're in South Africa. You asked about anger. Can anger sometimes be a symptom of burnout? Does that sometimes crop up for people that they're angry where they weren't before? Seeing nods.
A lot of times anger is internalized at myself, feeling like I'm not doing good enough, or why am I tired? Or why is this affecting me? Or why can't I be more effective? Comparing myself to other people. But yeah, with burnout and with stress overload, we tend to be irritable because we've probably been internalizing a lot and taking on too much and not caring for our own needs. So we definitely can have those angry reactions, and the extremes go together. The person who is stuffing their needs, internalizing their anger, maybe continuing to please people, trying to meet all the expectations, keeps trying harder and is normally very contained and even kind and helpful. That person, you're putting that lid on the pot of boiling water, and eventually it's going to blow, and we're prone to lose our temper.
I think that anxiety, depression or shame, anger, all can be results of burnout, all different symptoms. And some people will react one way more than the other. But when we're burned out, definitely we are more prone to have overreactions where we might react with more emotion than the situation would normally call for.
Yeah,
but then go, Sean.
I was just going to say, I find that anger pops up in a couple of different places in the pastors I'm coaching. One of them is when they fall into people pleasing. They actually end up violating their own internal values. Often those things get flip-flopped, and they're angry at themselves for it, and often don't even know it. And so that anger just is generalized and gets taken out on other people. Another way that I see pastors really experiencing deep anger is the anger is hiding other things. It's kind of like a secondary emotion. And if there's unprocessed grief, and we experience a lot of grief in ministry, but if that grief hasn't been processed well, it often shows up as anger.
Yeah, there were a few folks who asked questions about the place of grief that hasn't been dealt with, just sort of losses that have never been acknowledged, or trauma, the role of trauma. So, okay, we've flown by all these huge factors that can be contributing to burnout, and then these signs that it could be showing up in our lives. So there was sort of two general groups of questions. One was from people who, are on this call who think, I think this might be where I am, or where I'm headed. So we want to see how we can help them on a webinar. And then the second group was people who are like, I think somebody in my community may be going through this. How do I reach out to that person, or be part of creating a community that's more supportive, less likely to create this result? So let's start with the person who's on this call right now, who has that feeling of like, oh yeah, I feel tired. And I haven't felt hopeful in a while, and I don't feel like my work is being effective. And, many of the other things that you've touched on. Where's the first person somebody like that should go if they're having this kind of dawning realization that something is really off? What would be a first step for somebody on this call who's feeling that way?
Well, the sooner you catch it, the better. I mean, I think I would call Sean immediately as a coach for pastors in burnout, or one of our spiritual directors at Soul Shepherding, because the relational space of being listened to, receiving empathy is just always helpful, even if we're not in burnout. So the other thing is going on a retreat. So Renovaré, you do retreats. We do retreats in Soul Shepherding as well. We find it's especially helpful when there's an immersive retreat. Our retreats are five days long. I think your Renovaré Institute, like our Soul Shepherding Institute, you also go 5 days, which is pretty untypical. Normally they're like 3-day retreats, because obviously it's easier to fit in the schedule. But when you get a full immersion of a longer time, so that you get to really settle into a community and into some rhythms, some rest, into God's beauty, it can be very restorative. And a lot of that is waking up to the deeper needs, like Sean, that you were expressing, in terms of so much of burnout has to do with repression of my emotions, my needs, and not attending to that inner life. So waking up to that in the context of relationships and our prayer life is so important. And I think that we just need to not be scared to address it, because the truth is our friend. It doesn't feel like it when we've been repressing painful things or stressful things, and becoming more aware is difficult, but it's the path to healing.
Yeah, Bill's absolutely right. Go ahead, Kristi.
Some people, I think, definitely need spiritual direction or coaching. There are some people that are going to need to see a counselor, even maybe need to address some things medically as well, the doctor. I think every aspect, every function of our soul needs to be addressed at a time of burnout. And that's one of the things I want to say to anybody who thinks they might be at a burnout is, oftentimes one of the things that will keep us from getting help is this sense of shame. Like, I've done something wrong. I haven't stewarded my soul well. I can't let my elder board know. I can't let people that I'm in a relationship with know, then I'll lose their trust, or I'll lose my job. And so having a safe place to receive care is really important. And one of the things I want to say to everybody is that we have found, in the people that we have worked with and that we write about in our book, Journey of the Soul, is that actually a burnout can be a grace, because it can be a time when we finally wake up to realizing that there are some things in our soul that God wants to address. There's some healing work that we need. And actually, out of a burnout, when we will stop and press in closer to Jesus and open up our soul to his healing touch and cooperate and join him and Good Shepherd's care for us, that actually out of that often comes a next season, a very fruitful ministry of overflowing and valuable learning. And that's all of our story. That's Sean's story. That's why he's written about in his book. That's Bill and I's story. That's what we write about in our ministry. And that's what has qualified us and given us such empathy for the pastors and leaders that we journey with, is because it's not something to be ashamed of. It's just something to wake up to, and then get the help that God has created, and have others journey with you that have the experience. We all need someone who will empathize with us, who will understand, who won't judge us, and will help us and will mediate God's presence to us. at our time of need.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. I had to have a whole team of people to help me out. Burnout involves isolation, and especially ministry burnout. Pastors get so isolated just by the nature of their work and their leadership that in order to have any hope of real recovery, we really need safe people speaking into our lives. So I had to hire a ministry coach, a spiritual director, a therapist. I found a mentor, I found a close friend, and I went and talked to my doctor. And that team of people all taught me what it's like to have safe relationship again. And so then I was able to venture out and develop more friendships and deeper relationships that provided the space for me to do the internal work that I needed to do. So yeah, absolutely address that isolation first by finding safe people.
Would you?
And I so appreciate your vulnerability. When I hit my burnout in my 30s, I felt the Lord prompt me to say, you know, Bill, you're like the paralytic who needed 4 men to carry him to Jesus. That was a humbling identification, but I realized what you just shared. It takes a whole team to restore us as leaders when we have fallen into burnout or are struggling to bring our best self to the Lord and to our people.
Okay. Would each of you advise? So I'm thinking, you know, a lot of what we're saying will actually apply to people experiencing burnout in all kinds of professions. There was a Greg, who I know. Hi, Greg. He's a physician. He said, "Hey, burnout is rampant in the medical community. A lot of helping professions." And so I hope that a lot of what we're talking about here is applicable in a lot of different contexts, but specifically in the ministry context, when you are seen as a leader, I can just imagine that it doesn't feel safe to say that you're not doing well. And so first steps coaching, would you coach reaching out to somebody outside of your system first before you start talking to people kind of within your congregation or your the people who do the, you know, depending on what kind of denomination you're in, the people that do your oversight? Do you have any coaching there of kind of like those first baby steps? Who do I tell first that I'm struggling? Sean, I see you nodding. What would you say there?
A lot of times reaching out to denominational officials can feel unsafe. I don't think most of the time it actually is, but we have the assumption that if they know I'm struggling, it could affect a future call or it could affect my position here in the church if I tell my board. I've found a lot of church boards have been really responsive and helpful. Others have been really judgmental and harsh. And so discerning which is important. So part of what we do at PIR is we provide paraclergy ministry. We come alongside the pastors and offer help without any attachment to the denomination or to the church. We work with pastors in all different denominations. And we provide that type of objective help that starts that safe relationship. Eventually, there will need to be some conversations with the church because burnout doesn't happen in places where there isn't some sort of dysfunction in the culture. And so there's things that need to change, but first the leader does need to work on getting healthy themselves.
Right. Bill and Kristi, would you add anything?
Yeah, what I would just add to that is that when you're struggling as a pastor, missionary leader, shepherd who has oversight over other people, if you don't do what Sean said and start with someone who is safe and confidential and trained, you're prone in sharing with someone that you work with or someone that's your supervisor, whether that's elders or denominational lead or a lead pastor. You're prone to do that out of the brokenness, out of fear and anxiety, out of shame. And then things can sort of snowball downwards. And I've seen this happen where while many leaders respond well to vulnerability, some do not. And so I've seen it where a pastor has been vulnerable. I'm having some anxiety. I'm really struggling. I think maybe I'm burned out. And then then they're put on sabbatical, but not as a time for renewal and restoration and blessing, but like as a discipline. And then the elders take over, and then they find somebody else. And so it's best to start where you can process all that you're feeling and begin to get words for it, and see if you can begin to rebalance. And then, as Sean said, certainly there are important conversations that you're probably going to need to have, or at least setting some limits and making some changes within your own schedule and your own approach to how you're balancing things.
Yeah,
we often might need help, somebody who can articulate our experience for us, even help us find the words. Sometimes when we're in a burnout, we can't even find the words for what we're feeling, and we need that help. Somebody who's been down the road before us, and also somebody who can help us discern what do we need, so that then we can take those needs to our denomination or our support system and be able to communicate it to them in a way that it helps them, really loves them in a clarifying way in terms of what we need. And we're ready to answer the question of how we got here, because those kind of questions are going to come from those who are on our elder boards or in our churches or on our denominations. Oftentimes they'll feel shame, like, well, I'm responsible for this pastor's health. How did it get this bad? And so sometimes they'll be defensive. And so that's where, again, it can be helpful if the leader themselves has done a little bit of this work as well, and is able to communicate and speak the truth in love to the people that are their overseers.
Gotcha. So if someone on this call, again, is saying, oh, I think this is me. So maybe the first step is some honesty with yourself. Like, hey, I think maybe I'm not doing so well. And honesty before God, who of course knows us better than we know ourselves. And then finding at least one safe person who maybe has some kind of experience with burnout and recovery. And both of you offer ministries where that can be found. Are you aware of other ministries, or maybe how I should put this to you is, do you have a wait list, and is it expensive? Like how widely available is this kind of help?
Well, spiritual direction is actually fairly inexpensive, certainly compared to medical care or psychotherapy, even many spiritual formation programs. Spiritual directors are not qualified to treat mental health disorders or medical issues, obviously, but we train our spiritual directors in soul sharpening to be great at empathy, and the spiritual direction is informed by Christ-centered psychology. So it's very affordable, $90 a session, and you get great care and support to find that language. But I mean, even just picking up Sean's book on the Weary Leader's Guide to Burnout, it's going to give you so much language for understanding what you're experiencing, what you've been through, what you need. And that's a huge part of that first step of awakening to the issues that you're having.
Yeah, we do charge for coaching at PIR as well, but we are very careful to tell pastors that we don't want the finances to be an obstacle to you getting the help that you need. And so we have ways to help with that. There are lots of ministries out there who are caring for pastors and ministries, in missionaries. We're part of a group called Caregivers Forum. That's over 70 ministries that serve these pastors directly. There's retreat centers. There's all sorts of help out there, but it starts with asking.
Yeah, so good. Let's turn for just a sec. There were a lot of people who wrote questions to the effect of, my coworker or my leader, I can see it. I can see that this person is becoming very frayed around the edges, but he or she can't see it. What can I do? Do you have coaching for people who are, genuinely concerned, really love someone who they think is headed in a direction of burnout? Any suggestions there? Kristi, I saw you nod a bit.
It'd be so loving and so good to even offer to pay for them to attend a retreat or to meet with a spiritual director or a coach. Just coming with the language of, I so appreciate you, your ministry. I see how much you're giving. I see how hard you're working. I would love to do something to help you receive. I imagine you don't have very many places where you're able to just go and receive ministry yourself. Could I bless you in that way? I think something where you're really coming alongside to support them is going to be good. If you come and you tell them and confront them, they may be defensive. They may all the more not feel safe to be vulnerable and may feel like they need to work all the harder to prove that they're not burning out. And so I think we want to really look ways that we can will good for them, certainly to be praying for them as well, but ways to bless their soul.
Usually when someone's hurting, stressed out, or burned out, they're gonna talk to a friend or a colleague, and we all can get better at listening and offering empathy. Tell me more how you're feeling. Can we go out for coffee? I think that ministry, friend to friend, of prayerful listening and having a soft heart that really wants to understand, it will be a safe place and keep a confidence. That's what we all need, and we can give that to each other.
Mm-hmm. One of the greatest gifts that anyone gave to me when I was in the middle of burnout was someone in my church invited us over for hot dogs around the campfire, and he said, when you come, you're just going to be Sean. I'm not going to call you pastor. We're not going to talk anything about ministry. We're just going to live and enjoy one another's company. That type of gift is rare for pastors to experience. So that was really helpful. I've also experienced several ministry spouses called me and said, I think my spouse is burned out. What do I do? And we start by helping them because burnout is rarely just something one of the two in the couple go through. They often go through it together, and sometimes the spouse experiences it to a deeper level. And so if we can help with one person, we can often get help to the other person as well. And lastly, it's just important to create an environment of encouragement. Not just saying, good job, pastor, but saying the things that will help your pastor find courage and confidence in Christ. Reminding them of who they are in Christ, of their identity in him, their security in him. As Bill and Kristi talked about, that idea of secure attachment to Jesus is essential. And being able to have those types of conversations can really go a long way.
So good.
I really like that you said, Sean, affirming their identity in Christ and who they are. Oftentimes, pastors and leaders will get affirmation for what they do. And we think that we're affirming them and encouraging them with that, but sometimes that can be perceived as just more pressure to continue to perform.
So good. There were two questions about what do you do if kind of your top leader is toxic in some ways, if the expectations are sort of can't help but contribute to this kind of burnout. There's a negative way to ask this question, and then there's a positive way to ask this question. So one person or a few people said, what do you do if the lead pastor in a system or the head of a nonprofit that's doing ministry together, just places value on productivity over anything else, or really drives his or her team? What are your options in that kind of system? And then the more positive way of asking that question is, one person said, how can I as a leader create a culture that is, safe and a place where people can flourish? So you can come in on the negative way or the positive way. Maybe we should ask the negative question first, because that's a real pain point for people. If you find yourself, even maybe as a lay leader, in a system where the person at the top is setting a culture that's going to lead to burnout, what do you do? Suggestions?
So there's various forms of dysfunction at the top. It can range from just somebody who's driven and drives everyone else around them to serious narcissism. My friend Chuck DeGroat has an excellent book, When Narcissism Comes to Church. I'm finding a number of the leaders that are second-tier leaders in large churches that are experiencing burnout are facing just this problem. And for them, I usually say your best bet is to get out of the system and find the healing you need, because we've seen again and again those who try and address the problem be attacked and abused, and their families, their reputation hurt. And so if it's to that level of issue, then get to a safe place first. But if you're talking about just somebody who's generally driven, and it's a work culture that mirrors really most of America, it really comes from beginning to model healthy rhythms of work and rest, and show that actually you're more productive when you work at 80% capacity and 20% margin than you are if you're trying to push 100% all the time. And that can be a gentle way of showing that this is a more productive life. But sometimes those hard conversations do have to happen. And depending on the receptivity of the leader at the top, they may or may not go well.
Yeah, I think I would encourage, if you do have a leader that you respect, but someone who you are feeling overly pushed by, or not feeling like there's room for you to have boundaries, to speak the truth in love to them about that, to let them know your experience of the culture and your concern for everyone on the staff, including the senior leader. And I think that while certainly what Sean was saying is true, that there are leaders that there's characterological problems, or even systems that are very unhealthy and even toxic, we don't want to then assume that every leader is that. And we don't want to distrust all leaders. There's some amazing, godly, great leaders. And oftentimes maybe we're too quick to project onto them some of the things that we fear, or that we hear from some of the toxic leaders. And not every leader is toxic. So a lot of prayer and discernment around that. But I do think that Scripture's admonition to go directly to the person speaking the truth in love is always good.
I've worked with some lead pastors who were sort of accused of being narcissistic without there being like a psychologist diagnosis in there, without there being a thorough assessment. And that side of things is very hurtful as well. And in another situation, I've served in a few different churches in a pastoral role before we started soul shepherding. And in one case, there was definitely some leadership issues, probably degrees of narcissism, but certainly a lot of what you were describing, Sean, in just terms of the drivenness that was in the culture, and just some unhealth around some of the spirituality and relationality that was going on. And I wanted to leave, but in my case, the Lord called me to stay. And it wasn't like I was under abuse or depression or feeling ashamed or trembling in fear and insecurity and not able to be myself. It was impacting me, but I was able to have boundaries and do my best to do my ministry and be healthy within that, but be a positive influence in the community, be a prayerful influence, and even within leadership. And over time, I got promoted into a higher level and had more influence into that culture. And God did some very surprising and redemptive things for me and through me in that situation. So I think it's very individualized to the different situations that we're in, but we can always be aware and pray and be a positive influence. And certainly if you're listening to this webinar and you're in a situation that's toxic and it's damaging to your soul, then you need to have boundaries. You need to take care of that so you don't go down with the ship.
So good. This discernment word, it's such a frustrating word, but it's what we've got, right? In any situation. And one thing that is really striking me is what a redemptive and hopeful thing it is to begin to notice, and to start to notice, and not necessarily have to have a solution by dinner, right? So, I often share that when I started to see certain things in my own life, I heard the Lord say very clearly, don't judge, just notice. I think you're ready to see this now, that this is what's going on with you, or with the system you're in, or whatever. And that's a very, very hopeful, redemptive spot, even though it's painful too, as you begin to see places of dishealth. So I just want to say to people on the call, if you're starting to notice things, don't panic. That noticing is very redemptive. And then you can just pray for the next step. Put someone in my life, whether it's through one of these professional organizations or you just bring a mentor along or a friend along that's been down this path that I can begin to open up to. I worry for people that they feel like I have to figure out how to resolve this today, and it's probably not a one day thing. Would you guys support that? Just find that next step and trust that there's something very hopeful about beginning to notice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, I was just going to say, when I'm talking with pastors and they call me and they say, I think I'm in burnout, I'm like, well, that's a good thing that you're noticing that. And there's hope. With help, you'll probably feel significantly better in 3 to 6 months, but it's probably going to take 2 to 5 years, depending on the level of burnout that you're experiencing, to really feel like yourself again. So there's no need to rush into this. In fact, we really have to be slow and gentle and tender in the way that we approach our work of recovery from burnout. Trying to rush this work can just make things worse. So take it slow.
I love what you said there, Carolyn, in terms of that. I think that God does reveal what he wants to heal, but we need to be willing to feel it as well before we can really access the full healing. So that noticing is an important work. And that's actually the motivation for why we wrote Journey of the Soul, is because we needed to be able to hand people kind of a spiritual and psychological growth map so that they could find out where they were, get language and understanding for it, understand the different stages of growth in our spiritual life, which actually burnout can be a part of. We call it the wall, and there's different kinds of walls. Burnout is one. But like I had said before, that there's actually oftentimes a very deep work that's an important work that we can wake up to. And sometimes it takes us a burnout, that pain, to really push us to do the work.
In our model, we teach Christ stages of faith, with which Christ is an acronym. And a lot of the action in our emotional and spiritual growth happens at the wall. As Kristi said earlier, that actually is meant as a grace from God. It's an opportunity. It can become a soul pivot, because we can wake up to the fact that in the R stage in the Christ acronym of responsibilities in ministry, we've been overworking and relying on ourself, ego, ambition have gotten in, or people pleasing, or compassion fatigue. And so then we hit that wall. And so waking up to that and realizing that, okay, I've been unhealthy in this stage of responsibilities in ministry, how I'm shepherding, how I'm leading. And at the wall, there's this invitation, which is the opportunity of a lifetime, to the I stage in the Christ acronym of the inner journey, a time of emotional honesty and reflection, a time that can foster renewal and intimacy with God. If I will talk with a spiritual director, if I will go on retreat, if I will do this inner work, and that inner journey season that needs to be a lot more, need to have more boundaries. We need to be doing less work. We might need a sabbatical. We need to care for our soul. And as we do that, eventually in God's time, by God's grace, that can fuel a renewed season of ministry that we call the S stage in the Christ acronym of spirit-led ministry. And in spirit-led ministry, there's this fresh anointing. It's like the wounded healer stage, where God repurposes where we've been broken or burned out, and God repurposes that for ministry to others.
It's exactly where you are, Sean.
Yeah, actually, you guys, your book is largely based on The Critical Journey, which is an excellent book, but you've updated it with a lot of other resources and materials. And I use the same idea that at some point we've got to face this giant wall that is before us. And I really think that wall is our internal resistance to what God is trying to do. To grow us, to mature us into the leader and the person, the Christ-like person that he wants us to be. So yeah, we're absolutely on the same page there.
Okay, you've opened a narrative loop with your Christ acronym, because I've got the R is responsibilities, the I is inner journey. What is C and H? Can you give us the whole
Confidence
acronym?
in Christ.
Okay.
Is the C. That's where we're born from above. The H is help in discipleship. All the stages are discipleship stages, but the help in discipleship is being mentored, being in a small group, really learning to apply the scriptures to our life. R is responsibilities and ministry. We hit the wall after some years in the R stage. The wall's not a stage, it's a transition. We hit the wall at any stage or before we even begin the Christ stages. I is inner journey, potential for healing and renewal of our intimacy with God. S is spirit-led ministry. And then the T is transforming union, which is an identification with Jesus, even in his sufferings, and even in learning to love our enemies. On the positive side, it's practicing God's presence in all that we do.
Love it. Very cool. And we'll put something up on the resource page for people who didn't quite catch all that. Excuse me. Well, a quick thing I wanted to say about responsibility, and then I want to ask you a question about dark nights of the soul and other kind of lenses onto our journey. With responsibility, I just want to say, because I know there are people on this call who are saying, do you know how many people are counting on me? If I need to go off and have time alone, what's going to happen to these people? I have these responsibilities. And one of my favorite things that Richard Foster ever did was split up the word responsibility to response ability, and say that it is one of our responsibilities is to have the ability to live the kind of inner life and be connected to the vine and abide in Christ in such a way that we are able to respond to the challenges that come before us and the people that need us in life-giving ways. And that really helps me when I'm looking at my huge list of responsibilities and I think there is no go away and for stillness and solitude room in here. I think, but I have this responsibility to have a response ability. And so for anyone who's a 3 on the Enneagram, just add that to your list of responsibilities, that it's important to have a response ability. Let me ask you this. A few people, Dan and Lee and Ralph, asked about distinguishing between is what I'm experiencing burnout, or is it that I'm in the wrong place, or is it that I'm sort of being invited into a dark night of the soul? So let's ask that first question first. Dan and Lee both sort of ask a question like this. Dan says, how do I know if I'm truly burned out or if God is just calling me to another ministry? Sometimes I wonder if I'd have more enthusiasm and motivation if I was in a ministry that gave me more fulfillment and joy. And Lee said, how do you discern if you're burned out by ministry in general or simply need to change your ministry environment, your church or your job? Do you guys have coaching there?
Well, sometimes we look to our ministry and our work to fulfill us in like a deep inner sense that it's really beyond what work and ministry are meant to do, because our first love is Jesus and the Father and the life that God has given us. And so we really need to be finding renewal and regeneration in our relationships, in our life, in our spirituality, our discipleship to Jesus, first of all. And so then when that is spilling out over into our ministry, our work with the fruit of the Spirit, that's where we want to be. So sometimes there's just too much pressure on our work situation or our ministry context to bring us all this joy and this energy and this fulfillment. That said, of course, it's ideal when our work we're in our area of gifting and what God has called us to do, and we're in that sweet spot. Of course, that's where we want to be. And I think it's not really an either or question, because many of the people that we've worked with who are in stress overload or in burnout, they have needed to make a change in their career. And so that can be part of the opportunity that surfaces for us when we're really suffering with burnout.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Sometimes it's necessary to step out of the role that we're in for a time. Some of the pastors that I've coached have stepped out into other careers for just a short season in order to be able to heal and then return back to ministry. If it's a ministry fit problem, there's usually other indicators. It's not just burnout. There's other signs. We offer an assessment at PIR called the Pro-D that helps pastors determine where their sources of stress and frustration are likely to come in their work. And that can be a helpful way of understanding exactly whether this is a ministry fit problem. But really, all of this comes back to that discerning in safe relationship. Really, you need to talk with somebody and hear yourself tell your story and have them ask some good questions. And that's really where you're going to be able to determine what's the real root of the problem. Having somebody who can really probe deeply and help you discover what's going on is key.
I agree. And I would say experientially, when Bill and I took a sabbatical, one of the things I found on our sabbatical when we were doing no work for 4 weeks was that, well, here I still am. And some of these issues that I was blaming on work, I'm finding out have nothing to do with work. They're a soul issue. And so I had to wake up and take responsibility for that and say, okay, Kristi, this is an issue. You need to get some help. You need to look. This is something that's going to follow you wherever you are. It's not based on the circumstances that you thought it was and that you were blaming it on.
That's why we love working with leaders on sabbatical, even if it's a short sabbatical of a few weeks, but there's an opportunity for some intensive reflection and inner journey work with a coach or spiritual director.
So good.
And also, Carol, and I love
ahead.
what you said about the responsibility and the temptation that we think we can't step away because the needs, so many people are depending on us. But I always look to Jesus, and it's so amazing to me that he withdrew from the crowds, that he left cities where there were needs for people that needed to have his teaching and needed his healing. And he took responsibility to withdraw to be alone with his Father first.
Yeah, that's such a good word. What did Dallas Willard say? If Jesus felt it necessary, how much more should we, in our much more desperate condition, think that we probably need some time away as well? This is so good. Oh, go ahead, Sean.
Dallas also said, if you don't come apart for a while, you're going to come apart in a while. And so just recognizing that rhythm of stepping away to care for your own soul is what qualifies you to care for the soul of others. If you don't care for yourself well, really, you're going to do damage to the people around you.
Such an important word.
We get over-identified with our work. I'm thinking about the medical missionaries we've worked with. I'm thinking about the evangelists in our Soul Shepherding Institute, and we're mentoring him to spend 5 hours in TLC time, which for us is to love Christ time. And he felt like he just couldn't be silent and alone for 5 hours, because as he was on the beach, he was going to see people that needed Jesus, and he wanted to evangelize them. And it is so hard for him to get his head in the space that, well, Jesus did this, and it's you can pray for those people, but to nurture your intimacy with God is what for the long term is going to sustain you. And so he did it, but it was almost like he had to put duct tape on his mouth.
Yeah. Wow. Good stuff. And Lamott says, we're quoting all the greats, and Lamott says, everything will work if you unplug it for a while, right? If your computer won't work, you got to unplug it for a while, plug it back in. Yes. In this case, we're actually plugging into the real source when we pull away. So good. I want to get to a few of these questions that have come in while we've been talking. And let's see. Again, maybe we'll circle back to this. We touched on this, but Sarah and others were saying, this whole coach of professionals feels really out of reach for me financially. Can we I know we sort of addressed that, but anything else you'd say of a first part, if you feel like you have no resources, you don't know anyone, kind of a place to start? One of you got a word on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Even soul friends. One of the things that Soul Shepherding offers in our Soul Shepherding Network is soul care groups, and they are free for members, and membership is $19.99 a month. And just to be able to connect with some people that understand this language, have the same language and values, who can listen to you, who can pray for you. I'm sure there's other sources too, but to be able to have a safe place. And one of the things we do in our groups is not have more than one person from the same group, our same church in the group. That helps aid the safe place as well. But definitely soul friends can meet a lot of these needs as well. People that understand this journey and language, aren't in a place of influence over you, people that will hold confidentiality. It's really, really important. And it's important that that kind of be tested, that you really know that you can trust them.
As Sean said, many ministries like his ministry with PIR and soul shepherding is also true. There's scholarship funds available for pastors, for missionaries, for people like that. All of us, we all need a friend, and friendship is free. And the best way to find a friend is to pray for a soul friend and be a soul friend. Learn to get good at empathy. That's a staple in soul shepherding that we emphasize in all of our training, is the importance of great listening with a soft heart and giving empathy. We all need that. Empathy is oxygen for the soul. Relationships of empathy go a long ways towards preventing burnout.
So maybe even just looking for someone else that you can support, and that may create some honesty and some mutuality in disclosure of where you might be. That might be part of it too. Really helpful. Rebecca asks about, she says, we've mostly talked about sort of ordained leaders. Do you also see this with lay leaders, volunteer leaders, lay persons? Rebecca's in a system where pretty much the whole church is run by lay leaders. So I'm guessing this isn't unique just to people who are ordained. Anything you'd want to say about that?
No, that's absolutely true. This is true. Everybody goes through the stages of emotional spiritual growth. Everybody will probably hit a wall, at least one, at some point in their lifetime. I've worked with leaders in other systems, even parents that get burned out. So yes, the burnout isn't just for people that are in full-time Christian ministry. It's for lay leaders too. I remember a lay leader who was coming to me. Many times I've had leaders come to me and say, "What's wrong with me? I don't want to go to church anymore. I can't read my Bible anymore. I can't pray anymore. What's wrong with me? I think I've lost my faith. Is there some hidden sin in my life?" They feel so confused, so disoriented. Everybody in my church seems so happy to be there and so passionate, but I'm not anymore. What's wrong with me? And the pastor keeps calling me and asking me to do, and he's always been able to count on me. And now I just don't have it to give anymore. And I'm disappointing him and I feel bad. So yes, we all can experience this. We don't have to be in full-time professional ministry or leadership.
And what do you say to the person who calls and says that? What's the first thing you say when they express that, Kristi?
You're not alone. And I'm more than saying, I listen, I draw out, I validate their experience, I give them empathy, I begin to help them understand these stages of spiritual and emotional development and give them language for it. And then based on that, we have specific soul care practices that we know that we need based on what our home stage is. If anybody's interested in learning their home stage at Soul Shepherding, we have an assessment that they could take for free, and within minutes they'll get results that will kind of give them their home stage and some of the soul care practices that they especially need based on what they're experiencing in their walk with God at the time.
For the Christ Stages assessment of Journey of the Soul, and just go to soulshepherding.org/SGP for Spiritual Growth Path.
Great. And we'll make sure that gets on the resource page as well.
That's free.
That's awesome. You're not alone. I mean, I hope those of you on this call, you're as a baseline getting that from this. You're not weird. You're not strange. You're not, I think that's so helpful. We were, before we started the webinar, Sean and Monty were reminiscing about a Renovaré pastors retreat that they were just at. And Monty was saying, the first day, it didn't even just feel, it's all these, pastors just coming away for a break together. Most of them didn't know each other to start. But he was saying it's not even enough to say it felt like a hospital. It felt like an ICU. And because it was a place where people could just let their true state be seen. And then healing starts to happen just in that revealing and that mutuality. And again, of course, it's going to be a long process for some folks, but there's just a huge gift in knowing you're not alone and beginning to find people who understand. Bill, it looked like you were going to say something.
No, I'm just tracking with you and thinking it's so good that you did that in Renovaré, had that retreat for the pastors, because there's a special needs that pastors have, and that's why we've emphasized this in your webinar here, is because our pastors are the hope of America, the hope of the world, and all of our pastoral leaders.
Yeah. Somebody asks, would you speak more to trauma, and specifically the trauma of serving congregations that are not and will not, parentheses, unless God's grace intervenes, grow? So is there a particular kind of thing when you're shepherding people and you're not seeing growth? I would say also in a lot of the questions, there was the trauma of feeling actual betrayal and aggression from people that you serve. But even this kind of just this low level trauma of, it's just, this isn't like I thought it was going to be, or I don't see fruit. Anything you would say to that?
Well, in soul shepherding in our institute, we have like a trauma inventory, because it's so common that we experience different types of trauma. And of course, there's capital T trauma and there's small t trauma. There's trauma we normally think of as trauma B, which is like abuse. But then there's trauma A of emotional neglect in childhood or in a situation of significant need. But there are a number of symptoms of trauma ranging from natural disasters, overwhelming responsibility and stress, intense recurring conflict, obviously like abuse, bullying, being controlled or manipulated. Grief and loss can be a trauma. Going through surgery, abandonment or betrayal. These are some of the examples of the kinds of things that we experience with trauma that impacts our soul and can actually split our soul, fragment our soul, get us into a place where we're really not able to flourish without recovery from that trauma.
We find from our research that 78% of church leaders have lost a job due to conflict in ministry. And every leader that we talk to has experienced betrayal, loss, abandonment, people they've poured into, they've loved, they've given so much for, they've prayed for, leaving their ministry, leaving oftentimes with harsh criticisms, creating gossip behind their back about them, slandering them. These are real pains that are very common, and we hear a lot about. We have experienced ourselves in our leadership and ministry as well.
I think it's important to check our expectations too. A lot of the burnout that I see in pastors actually comes from starting with unrealistic expectations about what their church is going to be like. Eugene Peterson said that the church that you want is the enemy of the church that you have. Recognizing that not every church is going to grow, but every church needs care is part of the work that we do as pastors. God is the one who grows the church, not the pastor. And so we need to relieve ourselves of that pressure and recognize that our job is to be faithful to the call that God has placed on our lives.
Such a good word. Thank you. One more question, and then I'm going to ask Bill to pray a blessing over all that we've worked on here together. Damie, I hope I'm saying your name right, Damie. He or she asks, depression has been mentioned as potentially coming along with burnout, but there are some symptoms of depression that go beyond burnout. If not attended to, these can lead to suicidal ideation. What are your recommendations for pastors who may be leaning towards depression more than burnout, or their burnout is turning into full-fledged depression, but maybe don't realize it because there's so much stigma around mental health? Just any word about some of the mental health dimensions here?
Yeah, we're in Mental Health Awareness Month. And so in Soul Shepherding, all of our podcasts and all of our devotional emails are all about mental health needs. These are free resources, but depression is one of the big ones. And it certainly is a much larger topic than burnout and can be a life or death emergency. And so when we're feeling hopeless and struggling with shame, and the world is bleak, and we're walking around in wet cement, hard to move, we are really desperately in need of someone who will listen, someone who will help us, probably talking with a counselor. Depression can be very debilitating, certainly undermines ministry.
And one of the things depression does is it paralyzes us. And yet one of the things that's very curative for depression is taking action. So any support that you need support if you're depressed, to take action to reach out for care, action to, and shame will also paralyze us. So no shame. There are many causes of depression. Depression can have physiological, biological causes. It can be trauma-induced response, even from early childhood, and we don't have what we need to be able to deal with it until later in our lives. And so it might be surfacing finally because you're ready and you have enough support to, or it's just the Lord knows it's time. But to not be controlled by shame, not to isolate, that will make it worse. To reach out for help, to connect with people. You need love, you need care, and you need to get some help as to understanding the cause of depression. There is help for depression on many different levels. Sometimes medication might be warranted, at least for a short period of time, just to give you the jump start that you need to do the soul care work even.
And some people need medication their whole life,
Yes.
because the depression is biological and debilitating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great
Sean,
question. Thank you for your sensitivity to that.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think every pastor needs to have a therapist that they meet with on a regular basis. Most of the pastors I work with, if we come across trauma or depression, I say you have to see a therapist to work through this. And most denominations have resources available for pastors to do just that with confidentiality. So there are resources out there for pastors to be able to get the help that they need. And there's no reason not to.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been a really important conversation. So many resources have come up. We'll gather them up as we promised, put them on a page. I know we have friends actually from all around the world who are wondering, about applying this in their cross-cultural context. And so we'll try to hook them up too, and get them started finding some good resources. But this has been really good. And again, we just want to say to everyone, if you're noticing something here, be encouraged. Start that conversation with the Lord. Look for someone you could trust to continue to have that conversation with, and just see how this wall turns into a whole new life of growth in your life with God. So thank you, friends. Bill, will you pray for us as we wrap up here?
Happy to. Gracious Father, we just ask you to just wrap your arms of love around the listener right now, especially those listeners who are hurting, stressed, or maybe at the wall, maybe in burnout. And just pray, oh God, for the abundance of your grace to be poured out, and that you would provide safe people to talk with for support and for help, and that you would bring the renewal that is needed, Lord, for the pastor, for the lay leader, and everyone in between, Lord, as we are serving you various roles as shepherds, Lord. We pray, God, that you would give us a renewed vision for just how we can take care of our own souls, our own intimacy with you, and that being emotionally honest about our stress and our struggles is not something to be embarrassed about. It's natural. People in the Bible also experience these things. And so there's no shame, Lord. Remove the stigma around mental health challenges and issues of burnout, that we would know, God, that we are standing in the bright sunshine of your love and the spacious places of your kingdom. And in our Father's world, all are loved and all are safe. And there is room for me and my needs. And so we just thank you, Jesus, that you show us that that's what God is like, and that you really do offer us an easy yoke. It's not an easy life, but it's an easy way of doing hard things. And that easy way is a secure attachment relationship with you. All of us in this Renovaré webinar want to grow in that intimacy with you, that we might overflow with your grace and your joy and your peace to the people around us. Thank you, God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Kristi. Thank you, Sean. Such a privilege talking with you. Thank you to every person who joined us on this call for your walk with God and your friendship with us. Bless you guys. I think Monty will play a song so you all can say goodbye, and we'll see you next time. Take care.